Hey folks, back with another video. Now in this video, I am going to talk about the Jordan B. Peterson's podcast that he did with Matt Ridley. Now this is it's going to be my views on the ideas discussed. Now Professor Peterson talked about that he used three books of Matt Ridley, namely The Origins of Virtue, The Rational Optimist, and How Innovation Works. So let's dive into the video. Now, the discussion started with the Armageddon culture, namely how the youth is being fed with doom and gloom news. An example is the resulting Extinction Rebellion, amongst various other movements. And this is in the backdrop of the world improving rapidly. Now, more on that later in the video. Of course, Matt Ridley talked about how we are pessimistic about others more than ourselves. And this has to do with the inverse proportionality of how the further they are, the more pessimistic they are. And I think that wouldn't be inverse, that would be like directly proportional. So the further a person is from us, and the more we think their situation is pessimistic. Now, they also talked about how humans are actually wired to be oversensitive to negative news, and of course, it comes with the oft repeated saying that prepare for the worst, expect the best, and so it is built into us to prepare for the worst, while there is no need to prepare for the best because it's what kind of preparation would one have for the best situation? However, because of this, the news has evolved towards attention grabbing over the time and put all the mix together, and we get to see how the news has tilted towards reporting catastrophe over time as both the corporate press and the social media over the time has shown how news that is reporting catastrophe gets more attention than the news that is reporting good news. And of course, good news tends to come out gradually, while bad news comes out suddenly, namely earthquake, tsunamis, and all that. While news such as um, poverty has reduced, it's gradual, even though it's happening I mean, thousands, tens of thousands of people are getting out of absolute poverty on a daily basis. Now, the next set of ideas are part of the discussion revolved around the evolution of virtue. Now, they talked about how virtue or morality is actually um, rooted in biology. And of course, there's also this necessity that we humans have of going towards a mutual beneficial agreements, which the win-win strategy, which uh, has pushed humanity towards being more virtuous. Of course, all of this must also be. Of course, one must also look into the fact that over millennia, let's just say, and not millennia, but millions of years, in particular mammals, genes have evolved towards being nice to your own kids, and those mammals that were bad to their kids were basically weeded out through natural selection. And Matt Ridley also talked about how morality is a constant calculation we make in our heads. Now, these are not necessarily, how should we say, conscious calculation, but it's a mixture of conscious and also in my sort of like a subconscious in a sense. And Matt Ridley also talked about how morality is like a language instinct, meaning we have an instinct towards morality, but we don't know exactly what is and isn't moral, and that's the reason why uh, it our because we have an instinct towards morality, we could, depending on our situation, can have a particular morality that is suited to our situation and environment. Of course, another idea that Professor Peterson talks about often is the idea of how winning is not important, but rather how you play, where the objective is not to win the game, but rather to play the game in such a way as to be invited again towards the next game, and how being invited again to another game and another game and another game is also, in a certain sense, winning. And of course, it has. They also talked about how there's this I scratch your back and you scratch my back. Now, taking all of this together, we can sort of understand that virtue, which is rooted in biology, has emerged, let's just say, out of it constantly because, uh, well, naturally because we are social animals, which means we're constantly in contact with other um individuals of our kind. And so we have this calculation of we want to live for as long as possible, to, well, the drive to live. And the way we can live is by having a overall good relations with other individuals, and we have found that being virtuous helps us in that. Now, the next set of ideas revolved around they're talking about trade. Now, they even talked about how trade may have in fact be older than agriculture. Now, there are certain evidence that point to these, namely how certain things that are found in one part naturally are also being found in completely remote areas far away from there, and also, and there seems to be like a trade connection between them, meaning two areas that have a particular resource get exchanged between these two people through mediating tribes in the middle. So, indicating that trade may have been older than agriculture. Of course, they also talked about how human beings shared food, and this was partially to do with the deal with the situation of trying to build good relations, but also as a way to build a reputation. Of course, trade has over time shown that it makes our material life better, and that as trade has opened up between various people, especially in the last century or two, that the standard of living has been going up rapidly. Now, and a perfect example is that how in modern society we have become, um, most of us are moving towards being specialists, and we are a lot of a let's just say a large portion of a population is is specializing in one or two things, but their consumption is diverse, which can only happen in a free trade environment. And of course, naturally, something that has come out as a result of trade is that it makes people more nice to each other, because it seems to uh, make trade more, how should I say, when people are more nice, and they trade with each other, they could then continue to do trade and continue to reap benefits of the trade. And of course, trade is currently feeding roughly 9 billion people. And one of the things that we have found is that the biggest contributor to environmental degradation is poverty, and that as we have increased the standards of living of people, as we have taken people out of poverty, that we have also given ourselves a sort of like an we have freed ourselves from not worrying about being poor, that we can now then take care of environment because we have more resources in our hand that we can then expend into our environment. And of course, that was their discussion around trade. The other general discussion they did was around the progress, which is we there's a reduction in absolute poverty. Now, um, like I said earlier, that as we move forward, more and more people are basically coming out of absolute poverty and they're moving into relative poverty. Now, while absolute poverty, while I would say even relative poverty is bad, but getting out of absolute poverty is, I think, it's just phenomenal. I mean, the rate at which it is happening, that is phenomenal. Of course, on the other, another thing is the fact that how the productivity of the land has also gone up. I mean, something. Think of it this way: we are using roughly the same amount of land to produce food and all of the other stuff regarding food, while we're feeding twice as many people. So definitely the productivity of land has gone up. Of course, since World War II, forestry on net has increased, meaning in some areas there have been a reduction in forestry, in other areas the forestry has gone up, but overall, on average, it has gone up. Of course, they also talked about how tourism has helped build the environment as well. This one, I mean, you could just go and find how tourism has helped not just the environment but also the local people in different parts of the world raising their standards, which then help the environment. And there are, I think, as progress continues and as we continue to become richer uh, overall, I think that would naturally then help us to be more conscious of our environment and do more for our environment, which would uh, which would be beneficial long term. Of course, as of yet, more than half the population lives in cities. Now, obviously, there is a pandemic, so once the pandemic subsides, we will then know exactly how many people have left cities, but we have a lot of people living in cities. Of course, another good thing about the recent progress is also the fact that we're on route to eradicating slavery. Now, legally, we have ended slavery, but in practice, in hidden pockets of all over Earth, slavery continues. And I think, as as with the rest, as we become more and more rich, slavery in itself becomes more expensive to hold. Morally, it's also it's just reprehensible to be someone um, who can even defend slavery in this day and age. And so I think I believe they said that in a decade or two we may in fact eradicate slavery to just, mm, well, not to zero, but maybe towards in thousands instead of the millions that are currently in slavery, which is still an improvement. And of course, as slavery gets, as it dwindles down, eventually it'll get to zero. Of course, there is also the fact that over the decades, healthcare has improved, which has, um, due to improved medicine and all that, has led people to choose to have less children. Meaning now, parents, instead of having in the old time where they had a lot of kids, now they have two or three kids, in which case they could then concentrate their attention on the kids they have. Of course, this has other issues, but I think the improved medicine and the reduced number of children also has its benefits in the sense that they would need less resources than, let's just suppose, if you had 7 or 8 kids. If you have 3 kids, you'd be, let's just say, you'd be expending less resources. Of course, the progress isn't all good. There, it seems that we are not doing great on oceanic management, and this is basically the tragedy of the commons happening in the ocean. And I would encourage that we should privatize the oceans, just like we have privatized lands, and that we should allow people to own parts of the ocean. Now, of course, there's going to be few issues with that. Whatever those are, I think it is time that we start opening the ownership of oceans to private individuals. Now, after they talked about some of the progress, they naturally talked about the future. Now, Matt Ridley talked about that we will be producing more food via factory using the LED light. And this is because the LED produces very little heat, making it more viable to have these factories that are virtual, sort of high rise factories where they could produce more food that way. Of course, the trajectory currently is that the population in cities will continue to increase. And this will have impacts such as there's going to be a higher rate of innovation as more people meet, and there's going to be uh, new ideas that were not thought of. They're going to be small and big, but the innovation uh, cycle will continue, and that would, in my opinion, be a good thing. Of course, Matt Ridley also talked about how nuclear energy may ultimately prove to be the best way to save the environment. Now, in nuclear energy, fission is generally what people think of, but uh, technology is improving, and we may soon be talking about fusion energy, which is where it doesn't produce the nuclear waste that the fission power plants do. Of course, towards the end, they ended with the simple um, idea, which was that moving forward, we need to build a narrative that is based on actual data while also avoiding falling in prey to our biases of sensitivity towards negative news. Meaning, we mustn't deny the negative news, but we must keep the actual data, which is that we are continuing to improve, and we must keep an eye out for the negative news, but not um, put too much weight in them, let's just say. Now, overall, the discussion between um the two, Jordan B. Peterson and Matt Ridley, was something I personally enjoyed a lot. There was a lot of other ideas they discussed. I didn't want to make this into another long video like the last one I did with Professor Peterson and Douglas Murray. So I had to cut back, and luckily this video is much shorter than the last one. But again, I would encourage each and every one of you to watch the video at your own pace. It's not one of those videos you can watch in one sitting. And hopefully, you get to enjoy it at least as much as I do, or maybe even more than I do. Anyhow, that's it for this video. If you like the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticisms, and anything. And of course, I missed a lot in this video. And I will see you in the next video.